So I occasionally indulge in a Facebook debate or two, reasoning with my friends over issues while trying to retain civility. In these debates, I frequently see arguments that use the black and white duality as a premise. Sometimes it is used as a justification that what they think is right or wrong because those are the only two options presented, and sometimes it is used because someone assumes that I was using this duality as the basis for my argument. I haven't seen anyone else explain what I'm about to, so I hope that you will find this to be of assistance clarifying the moral dilemma that is incurred when we are confronted with the more challenging moral issues. So let's begin. The problem with the black and white duality, as is commonly stated, is that if you've lived any reasonable amount of time, or if you just pay attention, you will inevitably observe a situation that is not so easily resolved as merely categorizing it as being good or bad. The more you try to force it to fit into this duality, the more the duality breaks down instead of the dilemma. A common response to this is to declare the concepts of good and bad as merely being unrealistic. However, we are creatures that inherently understand that some things are good and some things are bad. For example, if you disagree with what I just said and desire to write a comment expressing this, you have made a three-step assertion. First, that I am mistaken. Second, that it is bad for people to be mistaken. And third, that it is good for you to correct mistakes. So rather than discredit the general concept that this duality attempts to illustrate, I am discrediting this expression as an appropriate means of illustration. As I said, I haven't really heard anyone use this argument before, so I'll call it the gradient argument. It works like this. There are some things that we can know to be a good thing, such as the concept of earning things, earning trust, earning money, earning the right to do things. It is a concept that we approve of. Similarly, we disapprove of stealing, taking things that don't belong to you without the owner's permission, sometimes in direct violation of the owner's directive. But what happens when you throw a complex situation into the scenario, such as if the thief would otherwise starve to death? Do we apply the two wrongs don't make a right argument? Should we incorporate qualifiers for when the thievery is permissible so as to account for certain circumstances? Or perhaps it is our current definition of ownership that is the problem. There are innumerable gray area arguments out there, and no matter what premises we use to discuss them, some of them will always require patient, delicate resolutions. But whereas the old duality argument cannot adequately portray the difficulty these situations present, the gradient argument finds a more readily available argumentative foundation for incorporating a good-bad concept. Let's take a pretty common instance that uses a good-bad duality and insert it into this illustration. There are virtues that, in and of themselves, are above reproach, such as generosity, compassion, justice, and mercy. Conversely, there are certain vices that almost everyone agrees on as being condemnable, such as greed, apathy, bribery, and cruelty. So now let's throw some sticky arguments into the model. What happens when we have a gray area with virtues and vices? We must first identify if the thing in question ought to be permitted or prohibited. For those of you who are wondering, I do acknowledge that there's a third category being encouraged, but for the sake of where I'm taking this particular video, I have elected to omit it. Once we have identified the type of response we should have to an action, then we must negotiate whether the response ought to be sanctioned, or perhaps even enforced, by law, or if it can be left up to the community in which the act was done. Lastly, we must specify boundaries on what qualifies as being something that these decisions affect. Even the virtues and vices can get into tricky situations. Is apathy always wrong? Is a person just if they exclusively grant mercy? Where do we draw the line between greed and frugality, or generosity and irresponsibility? These are questions to which the answers are not readily available, and so we must discuss them in order to find resolutions via solution or compromise. There is, however, another way to approach morality that is generally poorly communicated. It follows like this. Take our earlier illustration for something that is good. There are actions you can take in your life that are above reproach, things that you will never be wrong to do, such as taking a hit for a friend or loving people. Now I'm going to throw a curveball at you, because I want you to see how this works as a tool for clarifying an argument that is often contested. The mere mention of this concept I'm going to use upsets some people, so before you click away, I urge you to listen to the entire logical flow of the argument before jumping to any conclusions about what I'm saying. Another thing that is good to do is to practice sexual abstinence before marriage. I'm sure you can understand my disclaimer now, so allow me to explain this statement. Many people hotly discuss the topic of sexual practice. There are countless sides to address, and this particular subject is certainly amongst them. For instance, there are many how much is too much aspects to the issue itself, and there are some times where I, for one, have difficulty knowing exactly where to stand on the individual aspects in question. There are times when one genuinely does not know exactly where the line is drawn. However, there is no moral argument against someone practicing abstinence before marriage. It is, at worst, morally neutral. Therefore, when a gray area argument is entered into, a reasonable argument is this. Although I cannot tell you where the line is, I can tell you what is good. You may choose to explore into the gray areas to find what else is acceptable, and you may even choose to do questionable things because you find no prohibitions against it. I may or may not be able to help you find the answers here, but here there is goodness, and against these things there is no law. Thank you so much for having given my gradient argument a chance. I sincerely hope it helps clarify things, even if it only ends up helping a few people. There are many Bible verses for which my conclusive statement's reasoning has proved useful for me, such as, command them to do good, to be rich in good deeds, and to be generous and willing to share. They must turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. As well as, dear friend, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. Anyone who does what is good is from God. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God. And there are plenty more like that. But, over everything else, this is the one thing that inspired this concept for me. Philippians 4:8, which reads, "Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." God bless. Have a marvelous day. Bye! Thank you so much for having given me... thank you so much for... Don't judge me! Thank you so much.